Alrighty, so today I want to talk about processing 40 years of emotional, mental, and psychological abuse and trauma. And so, you know, that's a lot. That sounds like a big number, a lot of years. For a lot of people, though, it's a lifetime. And for a lot of people, they never get the opportunity to process all this trauma and move on from it. And until recently, for the majority of my life, I was coping with all this trauma, this narcissistic abuse that I've been experiencing in negative ways. And the way I was doing that was, first, when I was a little kid, I was really mean to other kids, making fun of people, putting them down. You know, I belittled other people to build myself up because I was so insecure. So as a child, that's what I would do to cope with what I was going through at home. You know, I got a narcissistic mother who just raged on me for my whole life. So I was coping as a child by being mean to other people. And then as I grew up more, I became, you know, a teenager, and I found smoking weed. So then I just chiefed weed constantly. And I'm in Oregon, and like weed is legal, and even before it was legal, there's weed everywhere. So a kid getting weed is no problem. So I just chiefed and smoked pot for all day, every day. And in a way, so I was coping with all the problems I was going through, and it was good for society because I was contained. At least I wasn't out in society making other people's lives miserable. But it was negative for me because I'm just escaping all the feelings that are coming up because of all this narcissistic abuse. You know, psychological abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, and I'm just escaping all of that by smoking weed. And that continued until my adulthood. And when I was in my early 30s, I experienced a loss from a girlfriend that she was a narcissist, and I trauma bonded to her. And like we were together for a while, and you know, she did the narcissistic girl thing, whatever, and just kind of you know, it affected me deeply emotionally, and I didn't know how to cope and deal with that, process that experience, and so I turned to alcohol. So then I'm smoking weed a ton, and now I'm drinking every day, and that's terrible. So now I'm an alcoholic, and I'm smoking weed constantly. And once you start drinking alcohol, it's like your life spirals, you know, especially if you're using alcohol to cope with an emotional loss or some kind of traumatic situation. And so that lasted until it got really bad, and I was drinking and driving a lot, and spending a lot of time just drunk throughout the day, in the evenings, finding people to spend time with that were drunks themselves. You know, the misery loves company saying, you know, you find that. And then it really just resulted in me getting kicked out of the place I was living, and ended up, you know, sleeping in a camper in my brother's driveway. And that was just kind of like a real low point. And I remember one night, you know, it was winter, and I was sleeping out there, and I was falling asleep, and it was just, you know, it's time to try something new. I gotta get out of this. And it was making the decision to meet everything head on, and I realized that I had to address all the things that were negative in my life, and, you know, were irritants that were driving me crazy. And obviously the weed was one, alcohol was one, but another big one was my narcissistic mother. She had inserted herself so deeply into any relationship I ever had, and any situation in my life. She was right there, just, you hammering me with whatever she felt I should do, or what decision I should make. And I never realized I had the power to make my own decisions. And I remember a friend of mine who was a drunk himself and drank himself to death, but he did have a lot of good advice. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me was, you really are the one making all the decisions. People can influence you to make a decision, but ultimately the choice is yours. And he would just hammer that into me, and I find, it really stuck. And one of the decisions I made was to cut her off. And this is before I knew about narcissistic abuse and all this trauma and everything that I was experiencing. I had run away from it for so many years that I was just in kind of survival mode. And so I actually did no contact with her because she was raging on me so hard, man. And it wasn't supportive. It wasn't like, oh, let's help you stop drinking and let's support you in what you need. It was more like, oh, you're always wrong and you've made all these bad decisions and you're ruining people's lives. And that's the vibe I was getting from her and my family. So I cut him off for 1 year. And during that year, that's when I quit smoking weed, I quit drinking, I started my own business, and I met my now wife. And this all happened in 1 year with no contact. And that's when I began to get sober and face all this trauma head on and begin processing what I was feeling. And I realized you really have two choices. It's actually really clear. Either this trauma that you've experienced in your life and that you're experiencing, you live by it and it controls you. It literally dictates the decisions you make. And majority of my life, that's exactly what I was doing. By choosing drugs and, being mean to people, I was letting that trauma, I was living by it. But when I got sober and I started to reflect and learn and, care about myself more, that's when I realized, it's okay to live with it. And that's the secret, is either this trauma, you live by the trauma and it runs your life, or you accept it and you live with it. And so part of processing 40 years of that is me, number one, accepting it. And then number two, choosing to live with it. I can live with this. It's okay. I can navigate life and be the person I want to be and carry this burden on my back. That is okay. That's a weight that I can carry. And so that was the first step in processing all this emotional trauma. And then the second step was pursuing the truth. I wanted the truth above all. What is actually happening? What is up with these people in my life that treat me so terribly? Why do I feel so bad all the time? Why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? Why am I insecure? Why do I want everyone to like me? So I started asking these questions based on these feelings that I had. And from that, it started leading me down this path. And ultimately, that's led me to this place right now where I'm able to talk to you and make a video sharing this experience because, I just pursued the truth. I just want to know what is going on. And so that ultimately led me to, personality, behavioral disorders, whatever. And from that, understanding narcissism and then understanding the behavior associated with that. So I chose to lean on more of the psychological, medical, scientific part of understanding what was happening. And I think that's good to understand labels and classifications, and especially with a real linear kind of thought process, which, I'm from America. I was born and raised here, and so we're very linear in our thought, how we understand things. And it's a good place to start, but you can't ignore the spiritual side of all of this. My soul and my spirit was deeply wounded from experiencing this assault for so long. And I think a lot of people have this problem. It's a sickness of the spirit. That's really what's affecting society. So it's important to understand and remember, we are spiritual beings, and that's a huge part of processing this trauma and accepting it and living with it, and ultimately trying to create a better life for yourself. So, you know, it wasn't until it's been 3 or 4 years since I started understanding this personality behavior problems that people have, and then understanding the narcissistic abuse, and then being able to fully get the truth of my situation. And, you know, it's never going to go away. All these problems that I have, insecurities, emotional issues, whatever, they come up all the time. And, you know, I just have to learn to mitigate those and live with them. And rather than reacting when these things happen and having them run my life, I can observe them and try to, you know, react in a way that's healthy. But, you know, that's the key in processing all this and in recovery. It's a real simple choice. It's you either live by this trauma and it runs your life, or you live with it and you accept it and you begin to move on. So, you know, the journey for me just began, and it's all working. Everything I'm doing is pushing me in an amazing direction. You know, I have 180 degree turn in my life. That old person is dead. That person I was before is like down the river. Forget it, man. Like I'm still the same person at heart, but I'm so empowered with, you know, my values, my morals, the things that I think are good, that I'm confident in pushing forward in life with that direction. And so much good has come to my life. You know, I've been able to start my own business, gain success from that, and freedom and time, get sober, get off drugs, meet an amazing woman, marry her, and have 2 children, and have a beautiful family. So all signs are pointing to yes. Like, I guess things are working. But really, it's important, like, you can do this. If you have emotional trauma and you want to resolve it, if I can do it, you can do it. I mean, we're all human. We all have flaws. We all have emotions. And we all carry this burden. And so I strongly encourage you to just think about the power of just making your own decisions, number one. And then number 2, that consider it's like you're either living by the trauma, it's running your life, or you're living with it. You accept it and you're moving on from it. So yeah, that's my best explanation right now for, you know, the current state of things. But anyway, I appreciate you watching, and I hope this is helpful. And I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.